Today on Conversations Aloud, we're discussing how to navigate uncertainty and chaos in today's very political world. Many people, especially the younger generation, are feeling lost, anxious, and unsure on how to find meaning or direction in this very rapidly changing time. We're joined by George Strange, who holds an honors degree in philosophy, is a black belt in traditional martial art of Okinawan karate, and is also a certified healthy nutrition and exercise specialist. He brings a unique blend of mental, spiritual, and physical discipline to the conversation. Welcome to the show, George.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. So George, was there a moment in your life when, where there's uncertainty or chaos that forced you to rethink your path?
Absolutely. I mean, not only once, but several times in my life. But most recently, I think it's been more of a decisive turn, if you will, on my path, right? And decided to go head on with, addressing the issue of anxiety and uncertainty. So most recently, I went through, this was about 10 years ago, a really bad divorce, and it left me completely trying to reinvent myself, right? And it was a long thing coming, right? We also, we had one of our sons was treated for a lengthy illness. So that kind of drained that relationship right till the end, and it ended up being a not so friendly separation. So this happens to a lot of people, of course, but it's something that shakes your foundation. So overnight, basically your identity completely changes, So the night before, I was a father, a husband, and all the other things that come along with that. And then the next day, I'm none of those, right? And all that is denied. And so, when you're going through a situation like that, you're on adrenaline, right? So you're just getting through everything, trying to survive. But once things begin to settle a little bit, that's when you get hit with the side effects of that. And in my case, I started developing panic attacks, severe panic attacks. And I was really wondering what was going on. So just to give you an example, one day I found myself driving myself to the emergency department at the hospital, basically telling them that I was going to die. And, they did all kinds of tests, right?
Yeah.
Everything was healthy. So that happened quite a few times, and it led me to having to force myself to have that examination, right?
Yeah.
And so I realized that it was my body basically providing the symptoms of an end of life, right? So I was trapped in that existential no man's land. People refer to it sometimes as the dark night of the soul, right? When they know they're no longer the person they used to be, and they know that they're going to be somebody else at some point, but they just don't know what that looks like, right? And that's where it was, right?
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's that uncertainty, right? Because
yeah,
being a father, being a husband, that's an identity that can sometimes give you stability, can give you an understanding of, your role and what you need to do. And once that's gone, it's what are the guiding principles now that make me make decisions easier? How did you kind of approach that? And in the midst of that chaos and uncertainty, was
right.
it kind of, let me sit down and reflect, or let me kind of, in that moment, you're just reacting. And then after a while, you then sit down and reflect.
Yeah, great question. And I think it's the latter, right? You are just on reaction mode, right? You're constantly reacting, and it's an overpowering thing because going through like a legal battle and all that kind of stuff, you're always waiting for news or updates from your legal team or whatever it is, and you're always because you're not used to a situation like this. It doesn't matter how much training you've had on anything, right? You suffer the consequences of that, right? And then it hits you, and that's when you begin to reflect, right? And to your question, that's when I started to take an inventory of what I had and what I could do, right? And you mentioned the two most dominant disciplines in my life have been philosophy and political science as well, and also martial arts, right? So it's, I actually, this is a funny thing, not a funny thing, but it was an aha moment for me when I realized that panic attacks were exactly like the word describes them, an attack.
Mhm.
And so I figured, hey, I've been training all my life for an unexpected attack. So I thought of these panic attacks that came out of nowhere, like a sucker punch, right?
Mm.
Somebody sucker punches you out of nowhere, except these were mental sucker punches. So I figured, hey, can I apply the principles of self-defense to a mental self-defense, right? So I'll go back to trying to assemble all the principles that would apply to this, and sure enough, I begin to practice them, right? And just to give you a quick idea what those are, mostly one of the principles is never give up, right? So that's where I found myself thinking, okay, I can't give up. I got to continue, right? Keep an open mind, have an optimistic mindset before you approach a fight, right? You can't go into a fight thinking, oh man, I'm going to get defeated here.
Yeah.
You have to keep an open mind. You have to be on mission mode instead of strategy mode, because strategies always are answering a question. The question behind the strategy is, will this work or not? And if you go into any fight thinking, will this work or not, you're in big trouble, right? Your mission is to accomplish whatever it is, kick the person's butt or whatever it is.
Mm.
So in this case, so all these were, practice daily, strive to reach the essence of your own essence. All these things are very philosophical as well, right? Because they're based on, Buddhism and Zen and Shinto, and in the case of Japan. So they have a very heavy philosophical background, right? And so I hate philosophy, right? Philosophy is filled with writings about anxiety, right? We're talking about existentialism, for example, right? All through existentialism, addressing angst and, describing it and, and what it means. So I started to give uncertainty and anxiety with this approach, I gave it a different meaning, right? It wasn't something scary anymore. It was something for me, something that I needed to learn about, and I needed to embrace it because it's part of the human condition, right? It's
Yeah.
part of the human existence. I just dove into the existentialist work and Soren Kierkegaard and all the big existentialists. And I kind of assembled my own method of intellectual self-defense. And that term is very important, because there's only one other person I've heard use that term, and that's Noam Chomsky. When he refers to developing a course of intellectual self-defense, meaning you're protecting your mind, right, from these unwanted, harmful messages, right? And so whether it's what's the situation that happened to me, which is an attack, or the panic attacks that are coming from within, or societal pressures to be able to develop the man identity and, man up and all that kind of stuff. These are all sucker punches that are coming at you that you need to be able to approach from a self-defense point of view, but with the confidence and the wisdom of, that philosophy provides, an ability to engage in inquiry without fear, an ability to question your mind, your state of, your state of wellness, and without the fear, which is pretty scary when you're going through something like that, right? The last
Yeah.
thing you want to do is double down on, am I doing okay or not okay? So when you approach it from that sort of philosophical inquiry, then you inquire into your soul, right? And your mind and your soul, and you're able to move forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, what you're saying there is you kind of realized, I think, that what you're reacting to was, or what your mind was reacting to was thoughts. What you had
Right.
certain thoughts that your mind labeled as negative, and you're kind of automatically, without helping it, reacting to those thoughts. And then
Right.
you said you gave a different meaning to those thoughts. Did you, in that sense, did you give it more of a acceptance of, hey, this is the situation and this is what I can't control and this is what I can control? Or did you kind of see it more as a opportunity to develop in a certain way? I guess it's very hard to see things as an opportunity in those moments,
Right.
right? Because you're
Yeah.
deep inside them. It's painful. It's,
Right.
you're not going to go to, hey, this is an opportunity, and you're get excited
Right.
about it. So how did what was it? How did you kind of approach that?
Yeah. So anxiety is fear, right? Is uncertainty, fear of the unknown, right? And so again, I really dove into the philosophical works to understand what that is. And indeed, it is an opportunity that you don't want to acknowledge that at the moment. Screw this. It's not an opportunity. I don't care if it's a good opportunity.
Yeah.
It's going to make me a wise man afterward. You just don't want to experience it. But um, you talked about the negative thoughts, and so it's important to understand a lot of experts agree on this, that about 97% of our thoughts are repetitive, right? And so, that's almost the totality of our thinking in one day, right? In addition to that, about 75% of those thoughts are negative. So it doesn't take much to realize that all the thoughts that I had in my brain, in my intellect, right, were the product of what was going on, right? So, despair, lack of, opportunity, lack of safety, security, and all that. And so that I was looping, that was my loop, right? Just continuing to think about that every single day. So this is when I really thought about the idea of intellectual self-defense, right? Because the intellect is where all the thinking happens. That's the house where all your thoughts are, right? And your life happens as a result of your thinking, right? Your behavior basically reflects your decisions, which are made through a rational process of thinking. And so I know I needed to go there without running into the negative thoughts, right? And so this is where it took time it was a time to be able to purge of all the negative stuff and try to recreate the environment in my intellect with better thinking. I'm not talking about necessarily positive thinking, although that works for people, right? Embrace a more positive type of thinking, but more of a realistic thinking, right? So just for me, just leaning on those two disciplines like philosophy and martial arts, I thought I have a wealth of knowledge here, right? That not too many people have access to. And I'm kind of privileged in that sense. This is what I should fill my intellect with, right? And so it's a daily practice, just like martial arts, right? It's a daily practice of having to take an inventory. A gratitude practice is very helpful, right? That's a meditative state where you are aware of all the good things, not only that you have, but the things that you are, right, as human. And then also understanding what the ancient ones referred to the mind almost always is the same thing as the spirit, right? And so, if you embrace that the spirit is because it's not bound by the, dimensions and the laws of physics kind of thing, right? That you can conceive that there's a possibility for eternity there in your mind and your thinking and your spirit, right? And so that takes care of that angst, that existential angst that we're all born with, that one day our life will come to an end, right? So I wanted to get away from that understanding that my life was coming to an end. And so that gave me the freedom to really trust my thinking again. I know that sounds a little woo, but the way I was able to make sense of that in such a not so much like a new agey kind of way, right? Kind of like an old hippie kind of way, I thought, okay, thinking about the same words that are being used in yoga and martial arts and even in philosophy, right? The same word for mind and spirit is the same word that's used for breath, right? So in yoga, you have prana, right? In Chinese, for martial arts, mostly, or for their philosophy is qi. In Japanese, we use the word ki. And leaning on that, because most of our training as black belts, at least in my style, you figure that we go to the dojo, start kicking and punching, that kind of stuff. No, we take at least half of the classes dedicated to breathing. And that brings a calmness of mind, right? So to get more to your question, what I realized in the end, when I was feeling okay already, and in my mind, I had completely conquered anxiety, I realized that I had a formula. And maybe this is helpful for those, the younger generations that are looking for that formula. And it's not my unique formula. I've heard it articulated, I believe it's Jordan Peterson that wrote a book recently about the 12 steps to more meaningful life or something like that. I'm totally misquoting that. But I had a formula, and the formula was this. The formula was engage your body, right? Engage your body and your mind together, and the only bridge there is your breath, right? And so practice with your breath, and obviously physical activity brings that naturally. When you go up the stairs, you're not breathing the same way as you are when you're sitting down, right? Now you're involving your breath, so you can intentionally do that.
So just on
And
that, because a lot of people
yeah,
hear breath and they're like, okay, I mean, I breathe, but I don't get those feelings of calmness. So
yeah,
when you say breath, it's you're engaging in a deep breath that allows you to be more present and be more in your body as opposed to in your mind.
correct. Yeah, it definitely does that, right? It puts the focus on your body. So now you're focused. You join any yoga class or meditation, they'll say, focus on your breath. Just don't think of anything. Just focus on your breath, kind of thing, right? So that basically brings everything down to your body. Now you're paying attention to your body, because your body is always, your body is the spokesperson for your mind, right? And this is why sometimes, your body manifests those symptoms that are psychological, right?
Mhm. So just
So you're right.
on that, because a lot of people feel like what they feel is a reaction of their thoughts. But what you're also saying is that you can do it the opposite way, in that you can engage your body in a particular way that impacts your thoughts. Because if you have deep breaths, you are creating a more relaxing environment, and that allows the mind to just calm down a bit, instead of just firing like, on speed or something. Because,
Yeah.
and a lot of times, I've been in that situation where I don't even realize I'm intense until
Right.
I'm like, okay, let me just have a deep breath now. And then suddenly my shoulders come down. I didn't even
Right.
realize I was tense and my shoulders are up,
Yeah.
and I feel more relaxed and engaged. And then I could approach something challenging in a better way.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So we call that in martial arts kamae, at least in the Japanese term. Kamae is basically the stance that you assume when you're waiting for the fight to start, kind of thing, right? And every time there's a few punches and things, you kind of step back and you're on guard, basically, right? That's kamae. And that I also, also apply to real life, right? So to take that step back, okay, this is a time for kamae, to
Mhm.
regroup, right? To focus, give your body a break before you, go into the action again. But I'm going to take it a step further, and I think that this really helped me, right? The understanding that there's two things in life that are exactly the same, and I'll talk about it. So your breathing and your thinking are exactly the same thing. All right, let me explain.
Yeah.
So as you very well put it there, your breathing happens naturally, right? You go up to somebody and you say, "Hey, man, I'm going to coach you on how to breathe." Probably say, "You're crazy. I'm breathing right now," right?
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, we take for granted what is always there for us, right? And so that that there's many breath-related conditions, right? Like health conditions, right? Particularly when people are breathing through their mouth, right? Because breathing through your mouth creates that anxiety, and makes anxiety worse. It also actually even has to do with the formation of your jaw, right? Your fitness, so many things, even the way you think. It messes with your sleep if you're breathing through your
Yeah.
mouth.
Because it's shallow
So
breathing.
we absolutely, right. So we know that taking your breathing for granted, right? I mean, there might be some, genetic, conditions that, that's aside from the fact, right? But this is something that purely happens because you neglected it, right? You didn't take control of your breathing, right? And so now that there's a big movement trying to create awareness that people should breathe through their mouths, and engage in some kind of practice like yoga or breath work. Same things happen with your thinking. Your thinking occurs naturally. I mean, if I tell you to stop thinking right now, you can't, right? This is something that's always going on there. But we also take our thinking for granted, right? And so as you control your breath, or you manage your breathing, intentionally engaging your breathing, right? Like you said, okay, my shoulders are feeling a little, everything is tense. So you step back, you control your breathing. You can do the same thing with your thinking, because your thinking happens the same way, right? You can manage your thinking by understanding your thinking, right?
Yeah.
And so over hyperventilation is, right, when you're super excited and super anxious, right? It's the same. It's over breathing, which is the same as overthinking. So by controlling your breath, you also are influencing your mind to follow that, right? As you were saying, right? And now your mind also begins to find that calmness that we're looking for, right? So we talk about the internal dialogue, or inner dialogue, that's always going on there, right? That is ultimately what my method of intellectual or fitness or intellectual self-defense aims to achieve. That's kind of the ultimate goal. If you have a healthy inner dialogue, you're going to have a healthy life, for sure, a healthy existence. But that will also, if, when we talk about spirituality, I'm not talking about it from a religious point of view, but that will also facilitate an understanding, a harmony with, your spiritual existence, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not well versed in spiritualism or anything like that, but that would be the prerequisite for anybody that's looking to become more in tune with their spirit, right?
Yeah. It's and just for me, that's something that that has helped with breathing is sometimes just to put an alarm. I have like 3 alarms in the day just to kind of, be present. It's very cheesy, but like it actually helps
Yeah.
just to kind of
Right. That.
get an alarm, and okay, yeah, be present, do the breath, just
Yeah.
kind of take it in, relax a bit, and then, it's like a reset of the day
Right.
essentially. And it just takes 2 minutes sometimes just to do that.
Yeah.
But it kind of, prompts you to kind of just take a step back and take that deep breath, a couple of deep
Yeah.
breaths to relax yourself. Um, you mentioned there spirituality and religion, and it's very interesting how the stats are showing that people who are generally religious or are spiritual tend to feel less anxiety and less depression. I was looking at some stats here, um, which were very interesting when it comes to kind of faith. People who have faith say, 43% of them say they don't feel overwhelmed with worry, versus 37% if they are non-believers versus believers. People who attend church have lower rates of anxiety, 22% versus non-churchgoers, 32%. And you can see that across the different faiths. Have you ever thought about why that is? Is it because that there's people feel more connected to something bigger than them, that they feel things are, there's a there's someone there that is in charge that kind of creates order, that there is a meaning to things, and that gives you a feeling of, okay, there's a meaning to things versus what is the meaning, and what does it mean, and then to your point, the existential threat of you dying versus believing that there's something after death. That's I think also a big one, right?
Right. Yeah, 100%. All the things that you mentioned there, it's a mix of ingredients, right? So yeah, number one, I would think it really takes care of that existential threat, right? That philosophers in existentialism call the dizziness of freedom. When they talked about freedom, they talked about raw freedom, not the political freedoms we envision or personal freedoms like I'm going to be happy or I have a lot of money to make good choices, plenty of choices ahead of me, or a political system or in a democratic society that gives me choices. That's freedom, right? Not that type of freedom. We're talking freedom, like if you are in charge of your own. There is no God in a lot of the existential. There's that idea that there is no God helping you out. If there is a God, he's got nothing to do with helping you out in life. He just created things and took a step back. Many articulations of that, but certainly that freedom is that you're on your own, so you create your life, right? And so that creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst, as they refer to, right? So when you have a system of thought, let's say, right, like a religion, you are provided with that, right? You're provided, the map, right? Your roadmap to eternity. You got to follow the steps. Every once in a while, you might veer from that and go, I was a sinner for about 2 years, but then I get back on track, kind of thing. That the idea is that you do have a roadmap that you've been given.
There's clear
So
rules.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's important. We talked about, the 12 rules that Jordan Peterson was talking about. I'm talking about martial arts, that you have a set of moral principles that you have to pursue, and that will keep you on track, right? And so those are important. The whole sense of purpose as well, right? When you're all on your own and you have this freedom, right? If anybody's like an entrepreneur would understand that, right? You're on your own. You got to make the decisions. You got to figure out how to plan and all that kind of stuff. You can get all the education, but in the end, you got to sign the dotted line and decide, the steps that you take. So that's been taken care of by religion in a sense. You don't have to decide. There's only two choices you make. You either embrace, a deity, right? You embrace God, or you don't, kind of thing, right? So if you are still considered part of a particular religion, then that means that you have embraced that. And so there's also community. Let's not forget that, right? Community is very important. Independent thinkers, and a lot of my clients and a lot of the sort of my audience is independent thinkers, right? I consider myself one. I would guess that you're the type of independent thinker too, that's always trying to embrace new ways of, growing in terms of your intellect, that sort of thing. And what happens, that can be a very lonely place too, because when you have your own thinking, it's really difficult to identify with the crowd, right? And this is something that Nietzsche talked about, right? what we think of, the mob mentality, right? So people, it's super easy to do that. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to believe, whether it's Republican or Democrat or whatever. I'll just go with what the majority is doing, right? And so you feel like you're part of a community. So that tends to also, for people in religion, that community is provided, right?
Yeah. And just on that, I mean, even the stats show that, to your point, even if you're religious, those that go to church or go to, be part of a community have much less anxiety than those that don't, even if they are both, religious. It's that sense of
Right.
community that makes a huge difference, to be part of something
Right.
that's not just yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. There's so many studies about that too, right? I recall one that was made by a physician in the States. Can't remember where in the States. It was a couple decades ago, and he noticed that people that were, and it's usually Caucasians, European descent Americans that suffer, say, a heart attack or something like that, and they needed to recover, they were all by themselves, and every once in a while, like, a distant, relative would come and visit. Their chances of survival were slim to none, right?
Yeah.
And then you have, say, for example, he used to, observe like immigrant communities, right? And immigrant communities, even the neighbors were in the room, right?
Yeah.
The neighbors and people that were neighbors 10 years ago and they don't live close to you, they went to visit you. So that sense of community. And he noticed, and this is empirical, data, right? That, people were making, progress, that the people that, heal and recover, right? In this sort of communal setting, right? So it's super important. I mean, and as a health coach, and when I work with people in terms of diet and exercise and all that kind of stuff, all that's good. But if they don't have that component of the connection, which also talks about identity, right? What's your identity? It forms part of your identity. And when you know who you are, and when you know where you're going, you got half of your life figured out. Maybe not by yourself, right? So this is a challenge for people that are intellectually curious and independent thinkers that still form part of a religion, because then they tend to they're really good at navigating that, that independent thinking and sacrificing enough to become part of the group, right?
Yeah.
But without sacrificing everything. Whereas most people, I think, when we talk about a cartoonish stereotype of religions, we see people that just devote themselves blindly. There is a lot of that, of course, right? In big numbers. But it's it's not as easy as it looks from the outside.
Yeah. When I speak to a lot of young people, some people, they want to believe in, yeah, a spirituality. But then they say, why should I believe in spirit when science doesn't prove it or back it? How would you respond to that?
What a great question that is. Patty, that's amazing. Okay, so science, of course, it's part of modern life. It has informed so much of what we know. It has created the possibility for technological advances, medical, so on. It has allowed us to see that there's life beyond the stars. The Earth is not flat. That so many other things that we now understand. Right. That said, we have to be very careful that science doesn't become the new religion, and I see it in many ways. Right. I saw it during COVID, for example, when people, just any Joe off the streets, would be saying, well, science shows this, right? It's the equivalent to saying, well, God said this, so I'm doing it, right? And so the word science becomes almost like, if you don't embrace science, it's a little bit of a little bit of shaming in there, right? So you have to say, yes, science. And research shows this. As a podcaster, you understand, right, that you listen to a lot of podcasts, and it's so common to see guests that show up and say, well, research shows conclusively that this is what you should be doing.
Yeah.
Show me that research. Is it research that it's, peer supported and all that kind of stuff? So where I'm going with this is that science, I think we need to maintain the understanding that science is a great tool that puts us through a lens through which we can test hypotheses and test different things and see if it's something that, there is consensus and in the community, scientific community, and now we can continue to move forward and continue to advance in our knowledge. But a lot of things like spirituality, ancient traditions, for example, like yoga and martial arts and all those things, it is not up to ancient traditions to prove that they have a scientific validity in people's lives. I think it is if science is interested in finding out whether there is a God or whether science is or spirituality is, something that's worth pursuing, let them do the work. By them, I mean the scientific community, right? And tell us, for example, now they're telling us that if we do meditation and yoga, scientifically, you can prove that there's changes in your brain and positive changes. But that's not something that necessarily, ancient traditions are have to prove in order to continue to be taken seriously, right?
Yeah.
So again, and my partner, she's an Ayurvedic practitioner. Ayurveda is this sort of the health uh, arm of yoga, right? The long tradition, right? So we're talking about natural remedies. We're talking about understanding your body and your spirit and your mind in ways that science would probably say, ugh, right? But yet it is still a very effective, approach to healthcare or to prevention, right? To disease prevention and things like that. And again, with martial arts, it's been around for so long. And with martial arts, um, I don't have to think, well, what am I doing at the dojo? Is this scientific or not? You know, I embrace it because it's something that has proven to be effective for so many years. And there's a model, there's a set of rules, there's moral principles to follow, there's a philosophy behind it. So it's a complete system that embraces the physical, the mental, and the spiritual, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's up to the individual to say, how far should I allow science to permeate, into my spiritual beliefs, and how far should I just, go with my spiritual beliefs and completely discounting what science is doing, right? It's a kind of a balance we need to strike there.
Yeah. And when did you kind of truly believe in the existence of a spirit? Because a lot of people, they find that concept difficult. They would say, I am my brain, I am my mind, and nothing else. Was there a moment that allowed you to see a separation? And then how did you kind of know that to be your truth?
What I do know is that what I refer to as spiritual is that inner dialogue, that conversation I'm having with myself, which when I'm having it, I know that there's a witness to that conversation. Maybe it's just my own psyche saying, well, if you believe it's just you and yourself, you're crazy, right? So there's got to be a third entity. And I think even in religious texts, this has been, part of the tradition, right? For example, Christians have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right? There's a third entity there, almost bearing witness to your relationship, to your inner dialogue, right? So for me, spirituality is having a good conversation with myself that can move the needle, whether I'm not talking about career or goals or anything. I'm talking about in terms of understanding myself and understanding everything else that's bigger than me, right?
Mhm.
I because I'm not a religious person, I'm not sure that there is the existence of God as we kind of conceive it, but it must exist, some form of God, because it exists in our minds, right? That's what philosophers, that if you can conceive it, it's possible. So I don't take that away from anybody that thinks that there is one particular person or God or entity that has exercises power over all forms of life. But what I do know is that for me at least, that conversation with myself is a conversation that is it's not just with myself, but it's also tapping into a collective consciousness, as people say, tapping into a collective mind, a collective spirit that we all share, right? Like I know that at some point you must have a conversation with yourself throughout the day, trying to figure out exactly kind of the same question you asked me or things that we've been talking about here. So I know that, we're tapping into that maybe at different times. So there is something bigger there and there is a connection. I just don't know what that connection is. I'm not willing to give science all the answers. That's why I go with philosophy, because I think philosophy has the tradition for thousands of years of asking better questions, right? We still have no answers to, Socrates' initial question, what's a good life? I don't think we have a good answer to that, but we have some pretty good idea because the question has been, posed for thousands of years already.
Yeah. It's really interesting you said there that there is a witness to the conversation. And, I never noticed that witness for my life. It was only after a certain period did I become or realize the witness to that conversation. Because a lot of times I'm so embedded in the thoughts, there's no separation. I am the thoughts. Or, I have no control over it. I cannot see it. I'm just reacting to every thought that's coming. But there can be, with practice, your ability to access that witness that sees the thought and chooses to react or not react to every single thought that you have. So it's very interesting that you
Yeah.
mentioned that witness, which I think for a lot of people is the beginning of to see the possibility of a spirit there or something
Yeah.
different to the just the brain, let's say.
Yeah. I love that you said that because to me, when I was in my darkest moment and, again, not having an answer whether it was a God, so I couldn't just get on my knees and pray and hope that somebody would take away my pain. But exactly what you're saying, right? That possible witness in there, right? Being a third entity, because when you are in despair, there's this dichotomy, right? There's the evil aspect and the good aspect, and they're at war, right? And you don't know when you're anxious, you know that you've lost control of both of them, so you can't guide it. So having a belief that there is a third entity there as a referee, even for your internal, dialogue, right? It's wonderful because, as most people know, when you engage in your internal dialogue, at the beginning at least, you can be very abusive to yourself, right? With negative self-talk, right? And so that's could be scary for a lot of people to dive into more of a deeper understanding of themselves. I mean, this is in most religions and in philosophy for sure, know thyself is the maxim that still reigns. It's the most superior, I wouldn't say superior, but one of the most pressing questions, right? Do we know ourselves, right? And because it's so difficult. However, that third entity, again, if I started looking at religion, for example, and again, I gave you an example, right? There is that third entity, right? You're looking at, in philosophy, I'm looking at Hegel's dialectics, right? So dialectics implies that there's a conversation between two, right? A dialogue. But Hegel's dialectic is interesting because it's always a third component, which is the synthesis. I don't know if you're familiar with Hegel, but basically, his dialogue means that for everything that there's the complete opposite, right? So he called it a thesis. Well, that's an English translation, maybe a poor translation. For maybe a more accurate translation would be everything about our human existence is about the struggle between conserving and making progress, right? Conservation and progress. Every one of us has a responsibility to reconcile that struggle between the two, right? And so it's different for everybody. We try to do it as a society. We try to do it in politics. We try to do it in everything. But we're all born with this need to reconcile that need to hold on and say, hey, I don't want to change, right? That's conserving, right? There's change coming. There's the divorce, or there's, an illness, or you lost a job. That's change coming. I don't want to change. But at the same time, you have the need to continue, right? To grow. So that tension there needs to be reconciled. And that's the synthesis that he was talking about, right?
Sure.
And so whatever end result is for you or for me or for society as a whole will be, what will create a new thesis. And that new thesis will have also a new antithesis, right? Antithesis, antithesis. And then again, that cycle of the tension being reconciled and something new comes out of that tension, then there's another tension created and so on and so on. That was very helpful for me when I was going through the worst, because it also spoke that to the human understanding that there is a third thing that can move the needle when we are stuck thinking that we're all on our own, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's when you think about making decisions, because a lot of people struggle with making decisions on whether they're doing the right thing or wrong thing. There's a philosophy of is good thing or bad thing, who knows really? You're just having an experience, and I could list the worst things that have happened to me in life, but from them I can list 100 things that I benefited from those things. Do you struggle also with how to approach decisions when it comes to that philosophy of good thing, bad thing, who really knows? And in that case, how do you start making decisions if you don't really know
Right.
if this is a good thing or a bad thing?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's where the whole trusting your inner wisdom comes in, right? And this is why it's so important to cultivate, a practice of intentional thinking, right? Intellectual fitness, as I call it, right? It's so important, and for so many reasons. But I think I've heard a lot of people say this. Decision making is like training your muscle, right? There's no way that you can predict all the possible outcomes, right? So you could have the best intentions at heart when you make a decision, and then you can see, you know, the things go to hell very quickly because the decision that you made. I think it's evident in the whole area of helping others, right? If you're somebody that's dedicated to helping others, there's always that element of how much should I be helping, how much am I intruding in that person's ability to figure it out on their own, so that they can also not only get past the situation, but that they also develop their own skills to be able to tackle the next one, right? And so, was it a song that I was listening to the other day? The road to hell is paved on good intentions, right? And there's a lot of truth to that, right? And so, with decisions, again, I think it's just a matter of practice. But this is why I emphasize so much. This would be my personal answer in terms of intellectual fitness. If you develop an intellectual fitness, it's not about being super smart or a public intellectual or writing lots of books and teaching, university courses. It just means you take ownership of your thinking machine, right? This is where you make decisions, right? And examine what you're considering when you are making a decision, right? And now it might sound something like, hey, I don't have time to take that time to see if my decision is good or not. But I think it allows for you to get used to having a certain meeting with yourself where you follow, rational principles like, okay, what is the evidence that I have? What do I have to decide on? How important is this? And then stick to your decision, right? But always know that your decision can also be edited, right? So decisions in the real world will, again, because we can't control everything, will have a certain impact, and you can still, continue to participate in those decisions, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I don't really have a concrete answer for that. That would say, wow, this is a good formula. But this is why, again, everything begins in our intellect, right? Especially decisions, and decisions are, the blueprint for our behavior. So this is where we need to spend more time, trying to refine the process of decision making, which is nothing but the process of arguing, right? Now, a lot of people in the world have given arguing a different meaning. Like arguing is like, you and I getting into a, back and forth match. I'm right, no, you're wrong. But arguing is a very healthy thing that's basically organizing your thoughts so that they can have a more rational outcome, right?
Yeah.
And I think we all need to embrace that, just like physically, people need to embrace physical fitness, need to eat better. I think people should be consuming better information, kind of the parallel to food, and also get used to having that fitness. Just like you train your body, you train your intellectual muscle to be able to decide something that agrees with you in the end. And I think that that might be the yardstick that measures whether the decision, whether it was clean or not so clean in the real world. But did your decision uh, align with your principles, with your values, and what you believe is right? Right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So just to summarize what you were saying, number one, I guess, is to leverage your breath to, engage in that breath to calm yourself and be more present. That's one way to do that. But also give some time to yourself for some self-reflection to understand, what are those thoughts that are jumping. Sometimes you don't even realize you're having those thoughts until you sit down and be like, what am I thinking right now? Where is that coming from? Why am I thinking like that?
Right.
Having that, dialogue with yourself is so
Right.
important. And, no matter how busy you are, you could always give yourself 5 minutes, 10 minutes to just kind of notice those things,
Yeah.
because once you notice those things, you're able to access that third person we mentioned,
Right.
and get into that, as you mentioned, practice
Yeah.
of noticing those things. And once you notice, you're able to, yeah, be more in control, maybe not of your thoughts, but of you reacting to those thoughts, at least. And is there, what else is there I'm missing in terms of what someone can do to, deal
Right.
with uncertainty and chaos.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you touched on that because so this is what I teach as well, right? So just like I would teach you with martial arts, not just one punch and one kick, many ways to get out of a situation because all situations are different. Somebody might be squeezing your neck in a corner. Somebody might just be trying to punch you with, their hand or kick you or with a stick or something like that. So you have to have different approaches for different situations, right? Now, we've been talking about taking our thinking for granted, and you were again touched on that. Maybe you're not in control of your thoughts, but you can, take a step back. So we, as human beings, have a default type of thinking. I call it the modes of thinking, right? So just to give you a better understanding of what modes are, I don't know if you are into music, but if any of your viewers and listeners are into music, if you understand music, I'm not I don't read music or anything like that, but I understand the scales, right? Kind of give you a structure for you to write a song maybe, right? And expand on that song. Now, a lot of the times you get stuck. In my case, I play a little bit of guitar and I always get stuck with one scale because it's the one that I play the most. And so I get frustrated. Oh man, I'm limited. And that's my default. That's where I go to right away, right? When I pick up the guitar. Yet there are many modes of scales, right? And those modes of scales basically introduce a little variety to a, pretty much determined box, where you can, play notes and stuff, right? Thinking is the same. So there's many modes of thinking, right? The one that we are used to, that was given to us at birth, that we run to every time, is called our default thinking. Is more like a linear type of thinking, right? So you get up in the morning, it keeps you alive, right? It's a survival thing. I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do this. It's kind of, I have to do this I have to do A in order to get B. And again, that's very strategic thinking. Strategic thinking can get you very, very anxious because again, you're always asking the question. You're always second guessing your next step, right? So your formula there of taking a step back, taking a deep breath, being aware of your thoughts, that's number one, 100%, right? The second one would be to be introduced to other modes of thinking. And this is what I do with my students. I introduce them to different modes of thinking. So reflective thinking is one. Reflective thinking is not, oh, shoot, catch the bus because I'm going to be late for work. And then I better pay my rent. Otherwise, I'm going to be on the streets. That's your default thinking. You can switch that to reflective thinking. What is reflective thinking? You're still using your thinking just like you use your breath, but it's more intentional. You reflect more on perhaps, the things that you are able to do, maybe compare yesterday to today and see where you can improve. Journaling is a good practice. It's a type of reflection, a conversation that you have with yourself on a page, which is a really healthy thing to do. It frees your mind from just, having thoughts floating around, and you can actually now engage your body and your vision. And now you have a good, dialogue with yourself. That's a little bit healthier. You have, I mentioned strategic thinking. That's something a lot of business people and military people, politicians, and people that are asked to perform in a certain way, they have to embrace and they have to understand is different from your linear thinking, right? Athletes, for example, right? If you're going to be competing in the Olympics, you can't be thinking the day that you're going to compete, oh my God, I got to make sure that I have groceries for my dinner tonight. You're thinking strategically, right? You're like, okay, man, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, right? So then there's also other types of thinking, right? So there's creative thinking. Talked about art and music, right? Creative thinking allows you to tap into different parts of your brain and different parts of your intellect that will create different questions, and those different questions will take you to different answers. So in a creative mode of thinking, I'm not thinking, oh man, I wonder if I'm going to make $1 million if I learn how to play guitar. I'm not thinking of that. I'm thinking, wow, that's a good sound. What can I create from that? That's going to, create that harmony that's going to be appealing to my music. And before you know it, you have a piece of music that you've created. You have created something from stepping outside of that mode of thinking. That's our default thing.
And these things don't just happen. You have to step into them, right?
Yes, that intentional thing it's a must. And this is, I guess, whether you're taking a religious approach or a non-religious approach, spiritual approach, scientific approach, the task of the human being, the only responsibility that we have is that we have to first gain control of it. And by that, I mean take ownership of it and say, hey, wait a minute, right? Without that, you're always going to be a non-autonomous person. You're always going to be a person that's going to be in reaction. And you're always going to be a person that will never understand your own self because you have never taken the time to do that, right?
100%. And I guess lastly, what's one misconception people have about uncertainty that you wish more people understood?
Great question. So uncertainty is certainly, I mean, again, we talked about this in the beginning, it's hard to see uncertainty as an opportunity for growth, but we know it will happen, right? I mean, for most of us, unless it's something like, a terminal illness or something like that, it's still an opportunity because now you're going into a different round. And if you don't reconcile your life at that moment, then having an open mind, if you will, or an open heart to embrace the new stage in life, right, will be difficult. So I think even in cases like that, there's the opportunity to see uncertainty as okay. So let me even talk about just the Christian idea of knowledge, right? So as the story goes, Adam and Eve lived happily in a garden that provided everything. And then it was the pursuit of more knowledge that got them in trouble, right?
Yeah.
So it's always that. Is that uncertain? What if, right? And so that's questions that's with us all the time. And so uncertainty is part of the equation of knowledge. Without uncertainty, you cannot have knowledge, right? Questions are a form of uncertainty because you're wondering what's going on. And questions are, for me, they're one of the, it's the equivalent of push-ups for the body. So push-ups are good for your body. Questions are good for your mind, right? They get your mind agile to think. And so uncertainty is that, but also uncertainty is an opportunity for you to get yourself, to get to know yourself a little bit better and be able to equip yourself with a set of skills for the next time that you have uncertainty. Most of us think that uncertainty will come once and then we're done, we've graduated.
Yeah.
Well, surprise, surprise, man. I mean,
Uh,
you think you got everything
you
figured
pay
out,
for it.
right? And then and most of us, I mean, as we get older too, right? The uncertainty of our health, will we be here even cognitively present? Will we be here? We'll be able to, use our bodies for, just regular things. So there's always an uncertainty. And so I would say, and maybe this is the personal trainer in me talking or the martial artist, if you don't train yourself to embrace uncertainty and use it to your advantage now, every time that you encounter uncertainty, it will feel worse and worse and worse,
Yeah.
right?
And in a way, it gives you depth, this uncertainty, because it's putting you in a situation that you haven't been in. And that situation gives you an understanding of things that you wouldn't have understood if you weren't in those situations, even though they
Yeah.
may be painful and situations that you don't want to be in because you perceive them as bad in the moment.
Right.
They are giving you an exposure and an understanding, even,
Right.
things like, when you get ill, once you kind of recover, it gives you an appreciation at least of health. Without
Right.
getting ill, you wouldn't really appreciate health as much.
Right.
I was just ill 2 weeks ago, and now, just being able to breathe normally after being
Right.
ill is just a beautiful thing that I just didn't appreciate, or I forgot to appreciate, because it's there, it's present, it's always there with you. And so you don't really recognize it as much as when it's gone. And that kind of, difficulty or uncertainty allows you to have that depth and exposure and understanding.
100%, man.
What
Well said.
Well, go back to what you're saying, which is that it gives you knowledge, essentially,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is key.
And that's an important point, if I may, just to try to summarize it here. So knowledge is important to understand. It's not more information. And this talks to your, especially new generations, as you referred to earlier, because we are surrounded by so much information. Never before in the history of our planet been able to, okay, I don't even know what this is. You Google it in 10 seconds, you have an answer. And if you keep reading, you have a pretty good answer about that, right? Now, that is not knowledge. Information is the raw materials for knowledge. For you to have knowledge or wisdom eventually is the combination of information plus your own filters that you utilize to process that information, right? And this is why it's important to develop the critical skills. So we have so much information right now, but it doesn't come with an accompanying method of discerning that information, right? So that's why anxiety is so prevalent today. I believe something like 32% of adults in the US alone will experience some type of severe anxiety. And it's because also correlates with the abundant access to information. But again, that is proof that knowledge is not more information. Knowledge is what you do with that information, right? And this is why it's so important to develop and really practice that inner dialogue, that discipline to switch to different modes of thinking, to see uncertainty as it's an opportunity to grow and advance, especially today in the political landscape, right? With so much misinformation, which creates more uncertainty, and a pretty intentional move towards anti-intellectualism to try to bring down the reputation of science and universities and the knowledge that's been there, rewriting history and so on. Imagine what that creates for a generation that's coming up. I remember when I grew up in Chile, and I was about 11, and so they had murdered the president that was democratically elected and installed a military junta there, pretty brutal dictatorship. So what they did with that president, he was in power for 2-3 years, but they erased him from the history books. And I remember as a kid, not interested in school at all, but I remember when the history teacher would say, and now we learn about this president, and all of a sudden it's skip to the next president. Like, hey, what happened to the other?
That's good. Yeah.
So that is the sort of the reality of our political landscape right now. And so that can create also more anxiety. And this is why I would say to your listeners and to anybody, this is the time to really arm yourself with the principles of intellectual self-defense to be able to tackle that and tackle anxiety at the same time.
100%. George, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. If people wanted to reach out to you or find more about you, where can they find those things?
Yeah, sure. So the easiest way would be to go to my website, selfempowered.ca, all one word, self-empowered. So that, social media links there, Facebook, we have a Facebook page, Facebook community, Instagram, Self-Empowered Mind Dojo. So just, if you go to the website, you'll be able to find all those links and it'll give you more of an idea of what we're all about, right?
Awesome. George,
Wonderful.
thank you so much for your time.
A real pleasure. Really happy to be here today.